Hello, everyone. I am Lisa Presley. I am one of your congregational life consultants for the Mid-America region. I work as the UUA field staff here to try to help our congregations do what you want to do better. And one of the things that we continue to do is we offer webinars on various that we think will be of interest to people. And tonight, I am very pleased and honored to have with us as our guest the Reverend Julie Taylor. Julie is a community minister in affiliation with Elliott Chapel. Is that right?
Emerson UU Chapel in St. Louis area.
In St. Louis area. Among other things, Julie has been very involved in interconnections and relationships and partnerships with various community groups around the Black Lives Matter movement and what has been happening there in Ferguson. So she brings that wealth of information. She is also one of the people on the UU Trauma Response Ministry board and has been a responder to disaster work for, I would say, close to 2 decades, Julie, and does training of people and how to do this. So we're really honored to have her with us tonight to be able to share her expertise on this matter. And so to begin with, though, we always try to start with the chalice lighting. So I invite you just to rest for a moment and imagine a chalice in front of you, or to actually light one if you have one there. As I share these words, which should be familiar to many of you from our hymnal by George Odell. We need one another when we mourn and would be comforted. We need one another when we are in trouble and afraid. We need one another when we are in despair, in temptation, and need to be recalled to our best selves again. We need one another when we would accomplish some great purpose and cannot do it alone. We need one another in the hour of success when we look for someone to share our triumphs. We need one another in the hour of defeat, when with encouragement we might endure and stand again. We need one another when we come to die and would have gentle hands prepare us for the journey. All our lives we are in need, and others are in need of us. And so, Julie, I invite you to take it away.
All right, well, we'd like to, with the size group we have, if we everybody takes just a very quick moment to introduce yourselves. For those of you that are watching on video, you can see on the slide there what we're looking for: your name, what congregation you're part of, your role in the congregation, and then one thing you hope to get from this webinar. If you're on the phone and not able to see the slides, at some point, go ahead and can't remember what we're asking, just ask and we'll give you that information. But it'd be great to just go around, and maybe Lisa, if you could facilitate that by maybe calling on people by name or number.
Yes, I will. And so I'll call on the people whose names I see first, and I've unmuted you all, so you should be able to speak. So Alexis, can you answer the questions?
Certainly. So I'm Alexis. I'm part of the fellowship in Jefferson City, Missouri, and I'm the vice president, which makes me responsible for planning services and then also for weather. And the one thing that I hope to get from this webinar is
that's what we should have done.
A concrete tools for the worship committee and the board to work with to develop our plan.
Thank you, Alexis. And how about Charlotte?
Yes, I am Charlotte Arsenault. I'm the minister at Georgia Mountain CU Church in Dahlonega, Georgia. And I am hoping to get from this webinar pick up on our plan.
Oops, I think I muted you because you're also the 704 area code, aren't you?
Correct.
All right, so you'll have to say your role again because I inadvertently muted you during that time.
Sure, I'm the minister at Georgia Mountain UU Church in Dahlonega, Georgia. And I'm hoping to sort of fill in the gaps if we have any on our emergency preparedness plan.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. Jen Gray.
Yes, I'm the minister in Danville, Indiana. I'm Jennifer Gray, and we don't have an emergency preparedness plan, so I'm working on encouraging us towards that.
Great, thank you, Jen. Ken Schilling.
Hi, I'm Ken Schilling. I'm from Goodloe Memorial in Bowie, Maryland. I am the president, and we are dusting off our disaster plan.
Great, thanks, Ken. How about Laura Gilkey?
I'm Laura Gilkey. I am the administrator and secretary at the UU Fellowship in Jefferson City, Missouri, from the same place as Alexis. And the board we're working on dusting off our own emergency preparedness plan. And I just want to know what I'm doing, basically. And that
Great, thank you, Laura. Okay, Mark Shepard.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Mark Shepard. I'm a member at the UU Church in Reston, Virginia, and I'm the head of our usher program there. And, I'm attending hopefully to get a little bit of insight into sort of how we can play into our church's disaster plans.
Thank you, Mark. Trey.
I'm a consult for the emergency preparedness for Georgia Mountains Unitarian Universalist Church in Dahlonega, Georgia, where Charlotte is our minister. And basically, I'm also going to be on the response team that we're developing. And what I'm hoping to get from the webinar is some guidance and direction on how do we go about training, and where do we get the resources to do that?
Thank you. And area code 203.
Oh, that's Margie Allen, who's calling from the Parliament of the World's Religions in Utah, Salt Lake City. But I am the minister at the UU Fellowship in Stony Brook, New York on Long Island, and we're just getting ready to found a second manifestation of our Safe Congregations Committee and get going with a leg of that work that includes disaster planning.
Great, thank you, Margie.
Yeah.
Area code 218. I think that's Suzanne, if I'm remembering right.
Yeah, hi, this is Suzanne Wasilchik. I'm consulting minister at the Lakehead Unitarian Fellowship up in Thunder Bay, Ontario, and do pulpit supply at Mesabi UU Church in Virginia, Minnesota, and at the Northwoods UU Fellowship in Pequot Lakes. And I don't know that any of those places have this.
I used to be in that.
Some background for developing that, or at least introducing it to the board.
Great, thank you very much. Oh, okay, and then our last contestant this evening is from area code 320.
Yeah, this is Brenda. Can you hear me?
Hi, Brenda. Yes.
Yeah, Brenda Graves, and I'm president of the St. Cloud Unitarian Universalist Church in Fellowship in Minnesota, 66 people. And I have with me the membership chair.
Great. Well, welcome. Great. Welcome to you both. All right. And with that, Julia, I think everybody has been introduced, and I turn it back over to you.
So the question being, could this be your congregation in the event of an emergency? And we'd like to all hope that the answer is no, that first of all, nobody would think that the best way to find out if you're prepared is to actually throw people into an action like that. But the concern is if folks haven't done the work, chaos ensues. Chaos ensues. So in terms of making preparedness a priority, I heard a couple of pieces already with things that folks are interested in talking about tonight that I think we can get to right away. And a number of you already have, a number of congregations, places you're representing already have either the beginnings of or maybe working on a new version of some kind of a safety plan or a disaster preparedness plan or emergency plan. And that's great. For some of you, it may be something that you're just starting to figure out how to talk about. And so some of the ways, I think one of the main ways that congregations do well in looking at emergency planning, preparedness planning, is to take a step back and think about preparedness as stewardship. And one of the pieces around this, I'll get to these other bullet points in a second, but there's a real balance that you have to go about with the idea of preparedness. You have to find a balance between acknowledging the need for coming up with plans, for being able to exercise plans, for knowing what to do, and the other extreme, the extreme of people getting so alarmed and scared that they freeze and they don't want to talk about preparedness. They don't want to talk about what might happen if there was a fire. And so finding that balance between knowing there needs to be planning, and that means considering things that folks don't normally like to think about, and doing it to the extent or finding a way to do that so that you're not scaring folks. And really, I think stewardship, particularly for houses of worship, is a great way to frame the conversation, because really what preparedness is part of stewardship, and it's about taking care of what we're responsible for as covenanted communities, our people, our space. That's some of what stewardship does. How do we take care of the resources that we have been granted responsibility for? So if you're wondering how do you start this conversation, that's a great place to start. It's a great place to start. So a couple more of these points here. So some of preparedness as a priority and why it's an important tool for every congregation. If an organization and an individual, a congregation, preparedness actually increases the ability to recover more quickly in the event that something does happen. And there's studies about this. You may even think about your own experiences along this. If something happens, the folks, individuals, whole organizations can bounce back. There's resilience that is connected to actually preparedness. And so that's a big reason if you're looking at stewardship, that ability to recover more quickly. How do we bounce back? Statistics show that organizations, individuals can bounce back much better, much more quickly when preparedness and some kind of planning has been part of what they've had to go forward. Also, preparedness is stewardship. It models the importance for both individuals in and outside your congregation to look at planning, to look at emergency planning and preparedness. If the congregation does it, that's modeling a behavior and a set of tools that can do a great deal of good for folks inside and outside your congregation. Also, if your own house of worship, if your own house is in order and an event happens that may or may not affect, if you are in order, you're going to actually be better able to respond to needs of the larger community. And so being able to take care of yourself makes you better able to take care of others, which for a lot of our congregations, that's something that we want to do. We want to be able to respond if, a flood happens or fires happen. We want to be able to help, but you can't help to the extent that you want to if your own buildings, if your people are severely impacted. If they're impacted and they didn't have preparedness in place, it's going to be harder to be able to help others. So that's the beginning of thinking about this conversation and kind of framing this in the bigger sense as stewardship. So the kinds of things that you want to think about having your congregation prepared for, and this is a partial list, things like fires, medical emergencies, break-ins, property crime, which can include vandalism, suicide on the property, whether that is a member of a congregation or somebody just that decides to use your parking lot. That happens, I can't tell you more often than I wish happened that we get calls on. Assaults, physical or sexual assaults, floods, you can look at hurricanes, tornado, blizzards, any kind of weather-related incident, pandemic flu. The reason that I put that in this list is what are the kinds of incidents that your congregation may need to consider that would mean that you cannot gather as a community. Something like a pandemic flu could mean that gathering together is a risk. And so what are the kinds of events where you are not going to be able to gather, and are you prepared for that? Here in the St. Louis area, over the last couple winters, there's been at least one Sunday during the winter for the last 2 years that I can remember. I've only been here 3 years, but for the last 2 out of 3 years I've been here, where it was unsafe to drive, and it was said, do not have worship on Sunday mornings. Things were canceled. So then, how do you? Are you prepared for that? And we'll talk about some of the reasons that you need to be prepared for that. So canceling worship, it goes right underneath. Are you prepared to cancel worship? How do you get the word out? How do you tell people that you're not going to be there? What are the reasons for? What are the policies around canceling worship? And then the big question mark, which is we don't know. We don't know what we might need to be prepared for. One of the things that happens with plans and emergency plans and disaster plans and preparedness things is that's typical. And I've been doing this, like Lisa said, for a long time. I got my start not quite 20 years ago. It seems like it. I think I definitely aged 20 years in the last 15, 14. But I got my start doing this kind of work. I was in New York City for 24 years. And so I was a responder with World Trade Center and got the start of my work doing that work in New York City. And was a part of a lot of planning and writing of plans for New York City with the Office of Emergency Management there from the spiritual care point of view over the years with some other groups that I work with. And one thing is very clear is that organizations tend to plan for the last disaster that happened or the last incident that happened. So if the last big thing that happened was a flood, folks will tend to write plans and think about things in terms of a flood, preparing for the last thing that happened. So that's something that's a pitfall that I would encourage you to think beyond and really think if you're already writing plans or you're looking to revamp or you're looking to start, consider all hazards plans versus something incredibly specific that is hard to get out of context to think, well, maybe it's not a particular event, but how do we look at a bigger picture of all hazards? Because planning for the last event that happens is not the best idea in terms of moving forward. But these are the kinds of things that you'll want to think about. Just some numbers, and these statistics come from, I got these through Church Mutual, which a lot of congregations get insurance through Church Mutual. Church Mutual has a lot of fantastic, they're a great resource for plans and for information about this. So these numbers are from a couple years back, but they'll hold pretty true. Average of 1,300 church fires are reported each year. That should say year, not here. Looking at about $38 million in property loss. Leading cause of church fires is arson. 25% of church fires are due to arson, with 30% of fires the result of mechanical failures. So it could be faulty wiring. It could be, as it says here, improperly functioning heating systems. How many of us worship in buildings that are old and may have faulty wiring or just old, outdated wiring? The congregation that I served in was a part of in New York City. The building itself was over 100 years old. And we regularly had issues just in our sound system with mice and rats going into behind places and chewing on cables. Now, it's not the speaker system wasn't likely to start a fire, but that could happen for lots of other reasons if other things get chewed on. So, just looking at numbers, a lot of us are in places that have risk. And then on the last point there, of the churches that reported fires, 65% had no smoke alarms, 96% had no sprinkler system. Scary. And when you think about why and how that could even happen, well, a lot of houses of worship become exempt in building codes. They get grandfathered in as a religious exemption, which can seem great in a lot of ways. Oh, we don't have to update this. We don't have to update that. We're actually exempt from these new building codes. That can seem great when folks are concerned about budgets. But when you look at the long-term implications that can come about as a result of being exempt, could be serious consequences. If buildings don't have smoke alarms and don't have sprinkler systems, because the choice has been, you know, to use money in different ways because they're not being required to meet building code standards. So keep some of these things in mind as well. So some preparedness tools that exist. We're not going to get real into the weeds on each one of these. This is a, you know, basically, you know, an hour, a little less than an hour presentation. But I want to talk about each of them, and then we'll give you some big pictures on some tools that would be helpful in looking at your bigger plans. So a readiness survey, and we're going to go over that a little bit deeper here. Having a readiness survey, so actually taking a look at your congregation, your organization, and see where you have some pieces in place and what you might be missing. And then actually looking at the emergency plan. Some parts of an emergency plan, these are not all of it, but these are big pieces. Communication plan, a media plan, certainly evacuation plans, and that actually goes both evacuation plans and shelter in place plans. Those really go hand in hand. And then also looking at drills and exercises. How are you going to practice the plans that you've put in place? So those are big pieces in terms of the tools that that you would definitely want to have as part of working on this. As Lisa said too, if you guys have questions, feel free to either raise that flag or type them in. You don't have to wait until the end. I'm pretty informal in how we have this conversation. So if you have questions as we go through,
right.
feel.
And Alexis does have a question about the best ways to hold drills and exercises, and it looks like you're going to be getting to that in just a moment.
Great, so I'll make a note of that, so I make sure to talk about that. So some of the pieces of a readiness survey, and we got a couple of slides about this. So first of all, do you have a safety committee? And different organizations, different congregations will call it different things. Could call it a you know, safety committee. I heard some people call it a response team. Well, that's actually more of a team than the committee. But who's kind of taking a look at this? Is it just maybe just the board is looking at it? But typically, this is something big, an additional thing you may want to have instead of just the whole board working on it. You know, a task force or an ad hoc committee that's doing this that may need to go on to become a regular committee. Because one of the pieces around any kind of preparedness, any kind of an emergency documents, any kind of disaster planning, if you do it once and then it goes on the shelf, the tool is not useful. It's something that has to be drilled. It has to be continually updated and looked at on a regular basis. So having some way, some mechanism built into your system so that it's not a one-time thing, but this becomes a recurring thing yearly or every other year that's looked at becomes really important. So how do you institutionalize that? Readiness survey, things to consider. So do you have a safety committee? Do you have an evacuation plan or a shelter in place or lockdown plan? Okay, so an evacuation plan can be something, if you think about it in more in terms that doesn't, again, alarm people necessarily quite as much as, oh, we have to have an evacuation plan. Fire drills. How do you get safely out of the building? And typically, one of the ways that that the very kind of non-threatening way we think about and talk about that is fire drills. Is there a fire drill? Is there an evacuation plan for fire drills? And then how about shelter in place or lockdown? For those of us here in the Midwest, as I'm learning, I didn't have to learn this when I was in New York City, but now that I'm in tornado world, I'm learning about a different kind of drill, which is tornado drills, which is really essentially a shelter in place. So what happens if it's not safe to evacuate the building, but the safe thing is to stay in the building? Obviously, there's other reasons to use both of those, but the one that's less alarming is to think in terms of weather-related disasters rather than, you know, the same shelter-in-place or lockdown plan is something that could be used possibly if in an active shooter situation. Sometimes, you know, evacuation plan can also be used for that. So, but if you go straight into a safety committee or a board talking about active shooter, the likelihood is people will freeze and you will not get past too much of that because that's very overwhelming. So I hope that makes sense. And then who's aware of the plan? That becomes the next important thing. If you have a plan and nobody knows it, or only 3 people know it, it's not really a plan. So does the staff know the entire congregation? Have you worked with emergency responders so they know where you're planning in an evacuation? This is where we're going to send our people. And they say, well, that's actually where we set up all of our trucks if something were to happen. So that'd be a terrible place for you to have your gathering. Important. Next piece on your survey, do you conduct public safety drills? So this would be around the drills and exercises. Do you have fire drills? Do you have shelter in place or lockdown drills? So thinking around that is ideally, it's fantastic to do 2 a year during Sunday, worship, fellowship time. So 2 drills a year during Sunday time when the majority of people are meeting there. And that can seem really overwhelming. Well, how could we do that? This is sacred time. The reality is that emergencies can happen during worship time, and the vast majority of people may or may not know how to safely exit a building. You look like you're going to ask something, Lisa, or add something?
Well, I was just going to add something. One of the things that these drills do, and having this plan does, is it increases the parents' sense of safety and security about their children. Because one of the things that can go horribly wrong in any kind of plan is if the parents don't know what's going on and they fear for their children, they're rushing to the classrooms to try to retrieve their children, maybe blocking those children from getting out of the site. And so a lot of this is to help make sure that people have faith that you will take care of them and their children so that they don't go against the plans that you're creating.
Yep, and that's something that is key. There is research that shows that caretakers of children, be they parents, be they grandparents, whoever is the caretaker of children, will directly oppose the evacuation routes, whether it's in a building or whether it's hurricane routes to get out of an area. They will go the opposite way if their children are there and they don't trust that whoever's taking care of their children is going to take care of them. Now, it could be that their children are safe and now they've just gone further into a building or somewhere and they put themselves in danger when there was no need. So the reason to do drills, instead of just saying, well, we've got a plan, everybody knows the plan. The reason you drill is because people need it in their bodies to experience, number one, how to get in and out of buildings, how to do it, and then to be able to, particularly for those that are responsible for anybody with mobility issues or any other issues, and kids become, if you're responsible for somebody, you have to know they're being taken care of. And the way to do that responsibly and more likely to be effective is to actually physically do it. I've spoken to congregations. I'm thinking of one in particular who told the story of how this congregation, this is in New Jersey, and they had decided to, do a fire drill. And it took something like 5.5 minutes to get everybody out of the building. And the minister said, that's not good enough. We're going to do this every Sunday until we can get this building evacuated in 90 seconds. And so they worked on that, and they did that until the congregation could get out and get to the place where they needed to meet. And this is a large congregation, 300 plus people, 100 kids in the RE program. But they took that as a priority for them. And as this particular minister who told me the story, they were an intern minister still in seminary at this congregation where they were. And a few months after having this experience where they were terrible at first, but then got really good at evacuating the building, the intern minister was in the pulpit on a Sunday morning. So senior minister, the full authority was not in the pulpit, and the sanctuary filled with black smoke. And you don't, like I said, you don't have the authority of the congregation there. You don't have the senior minister that says, oh, we're going. The student intern was there. And as soon as that happened, they listened to this individual. It's time to go. And everybody evacuated the building safely in a very short period of time. And it turned out there was a malfunction in the boiler that had caused the smoke. And so it was taken care of quickly, but boilers can have other things can happen. So it was just a great, it turned out to be a great thing, and this congregation does it all the time now. So I'll say too, around drills, one of the things that sometimes you'll get pushback from people around drills. Well, we don't want to do a full drill because we don't want to scare the children. And you may hear that. And I'll tell you right now, the people that are least worried about drills are kids. Kids do drills, public safety drills, lockdown and evacuation drills in their schools constantly. And the people that are least worried about that are kids, but adults will project that fear onto the kids thinking they don't want to worry them. Take that as a projection, understand that. If you get pushback on that, talk about how it's better to do the practice, kind of the things that I've talked about, and it actually lowers anxiety to get this in your body. But take a look at somebody. I almost guarantee you, somebody's going to say, "We don't want to scare the kids." Kids do great. I've watched this in congregations where you've always got one or two kids that will never do anything that anyone remotely asks them to do. I've watched as soon as the fire alarm goes, they are in line quiet with the rest of the kids because they're trained to do that on a regular basis. No worries, and you don't even have to corral them. They just do it. So don't let people derail you with that. Let me also say about public safety drills and around the things around evacuations or shelter in place and lockdown and connecting to who's aware of the plan. How are you going to let people know what that is? Maybe you're going to do amazing and you're going to do drills twice a year. That's fantastic. But there's 50 other Sundays that happen during the year where visitors come, new people come in, they maybe miss those 2 other Sundays. So how are they going to know what to do in the event of an emergency? And you're going to need to consider, how are we going to let folks know what the procedure is? You can do it through signs. You can do it, having good signage up in terms of evacuation pass. I think there's a great possibility if you've got printed orders of service. There's no reason, depending on the space and how you figure out how to set it up, you can always have a map or descriptions in your order of service that's there every week, so that when folks come that aren't used to being there, they are also being taken care of. A lot of really what we can think about in terms of this preparedness, think about it in terms of stewardship, but also think about how this can actually be about hospitality. Letting people know that you're taking care of them is really important for having good hospitality. So you can think about it in those ways. Another piece to consider, particularly, it doesn't have to be just with parents, but certainly if you've got parents with kids in an RE program, consider doing walkthroughs of the building a few times a year, where people get to walk through and see the entire building. And know, as you're doing a walkthrough, it's to orient folks to your building and your grounds, but as part of that, let them see where exits are, where different things are. And if you're in this part of the building, this is how you would evacuate, and this is how we would meet out in the parking lot for XYZ. Again, it can be part of hospitality. New members meetings, part of a new members orientation is literally walking through the entire building. I would also say that another little back pocket tip here you might consider is get your kids and teens to take you through a tour of the building and have them show you where all the great places to hide are. Because the kids and youth know your buildings in ways that you don't, and you are going to want to know the good hiding places in your building.
Julie, I just want to do a time check. We have about a half an hour left.
Yep. I mean, as a parent of a 3-year-old, that makes my heart go fast, but I want to know. I want to know a little bit more than he does about the building. All right. So also look at who, in terms of staff and designated members, who is trained in CPR. AED is automatic electronic defibrillator. So the paddle machine, if you don't know an AED, and typically now they're taught together. And who's trained in first aid. Another thing that you might consider for your congregation, especially depending on demographics, is consider the purchase of an AED for your congregation. As a former EMT, CPR may keep the blood going in somebody's body until an ambulance gets there, where an AED may be able to shock a rhythm back to save somebody's life, but CPR is just holding down the fort until the AED gets there. So if there's a possibility you can have an AED in your building prior to, it's a really great idea. You can do fundraising around that, but just think about who knows CPR, do you have an AED, who's trained in it, and really get as many people trained in that as possible. The person who was talking about being on the usher team and what they can do, if you've got an usher team, make sure everybody on the usher team, that everybody is always up to date on their CPR. I don't know how many of you in your history have ever taken a CPR class, but if you haven't taken one in the last 2 or 3 years, probably many of you, if you took it a while ago, remember the ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation. Well, in the last couple of years, that's changed. It's now CAB. It's now circulation, airway, and breathing. So even that has changed. So get up to date if you haven't. So on site, do you have first aid kits? Hopefully more than one. Do people know where they are? And then the next question is, how recently have they been restocked? Have people been in there using stuff and then things have never been replaced? So that's again why you don't want just your preparedness to sit on the shelf, why you want to make sure you're checking things every year. That would be one of the things that you'd want to make sure you're going around every couple of months to check. Finding out where fire extinguishers are, where they are, how frequently are they checked. Often local municipal fire departments are required to come in and check those things, but make sure that that's the case. Do you have non-electric phones, which a lot of organizations, even households, don't have anymore? Every phone we have plugs into a wall somewhere and needs electricity to be able to run. Well, if you go and get just an old, phone, one of those old, I don't remember what they're called, just those $9 phones, right, that plug directly just into the phone outlet that you don't need an electric power cord. You can get one at Radio Shack or probably anywhere for under $10, even an old Princess phone, anything like that. Even in the event of large power outages, the phone lines run on different power. And so typically it has to be pretty big for just a phone that plugs in through a phone jack to lose power. I was in New York City during the big blackout in 2003 that took out a whole lot of the eastern part of the US. The plug-in phones that plug right into the jack still work, so at least where I was. So that's a great thing to have in general in case there's a power outage, but you can still call out if you need to. Also thinking about panic or alarm buttons that are easily accessible. Again, thinking in terms of, that word kind of freaks me out. It says panic right in there, an alarm that's right in the word. So why would we want a panic or alarm button? If you think about who in a congregation, typically a lot of our sanctuaries are kind of set up where you enter from the rear of the sanctuary, and everything is organized to be looking at the pulpit, right, the chancel, all of that. So almost everyone in the sanctuary has their back to the doors. So the main people who are able to see the whole picture of what's going on are the folks that are up on the chancel or in the pulpit. Maybe someone walks in with intentions that are not good. The folks up front are the ones to see it, and they're probably the furthest away from being able to call for help. It could be that they see somebody not breathing right. And again, the folks in the chancel, how do they get alarm and attract attention as quickly as they can? Is that accessible? Thinking again about battery operated smoke heat detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, I talked about it before, because of zoning and most houses of worship being exempt from a lot of restrictions, lots of places don't have them, even though it's common sense they should. Some places don't. So really take a look in terms of readiness. These are some real basics.
And one other thing too, I just want to say on this is that many people don't know the address of their own church. And so it's always good to have that posted, because if somebody is calling 911 and they're doing it from a cell phone in particular, nobody will know where you are. And so being able to have something posted in a couple of different locations, what the physical address of the church is, can help make crucial difference in times of disaster.
Yep. And that would be part of that could be part of the communications plan. Communications, there's a lot of moving parts to that. Knowing, the address, what street corner, we're on the corner of, or we're on this street between this and this, really key. All right, so looking at the planning process in terms of forming a plan, first of all, who can even authorize that you're doing this? So find out through whatever whatever policy, not policy governance, whatever governance structure you're under, how can the congregation, how can a committee actually have the authority to do the work of planning, and who has the authority to grant that? So make sure to do that, and then figure out who's actually going to do the work. Then really take a look at policies. What do you have and what do you need? A lot of our congregations have safe congregations policy. And safe congregation, I was just having a conversation today with a group of UU ministers about safety and this exact thing that we're talking about. We were just speaking about this afternoon, and a couple people said, well, we've got a safe congregations policy. I said, well, that's great. That's a little different than looking at safety. And so the safety pieces may be a part 2 of a safe congregations policy. You may call it something completely different, but be really clear that they're not the same thing. That's an important policy. And so that may be under the what do you have, and then what do you need are these other pieces we're looking at. Also looking in terms of a plan, building into the plan, who's going to update it? How's it going to be updated? What's the accountability going to be? I mean, I can't answer all these questions for you in terms of what is going to work specifically for your congregation, because every one of ours is going to be different. This kind of webinar, the 60 minutes, is about giving you, and unfortunately, to some degree, more questions to take back, but at least these, I think, are directed questions that hopefully will help you come up with answers. And then figuring out how are you going to communicate this plan, which is key. All right, so now something happened. Whatever the it is, it happened. And now what are you going to do? So there is something called post-incident resilience. How do you bounce back? How does an individual, how do groups, how do organizations bounce back? And things to think about in terms of bouncing back, getting through to the other side. And we can go, trust me, again, we'll get at the end of this and we can go back for other questions if you want to get more into some pieces, but looking here with bouncing back, what resources are available? Do you know what's available to help you get through? If you don't know, where are the beginning places to look? So what resources are available? Was there a plan? And then if there was a plan, was it used or was it not used? That is gonna change the kind of elasticity of the bouncing back. If there was no plan, like in the earlier video, that's harder for folks to bounce back from when there was no plan and something happens. And then there is one, but only 4 people knew about it. Then you get up and downs with, well, how come we didn't know? And if we had only known, then what? And it's harder to bounce back if there's not a plan. And then if it's not used, it becomes more complicated. It doesn't mean it's not possible. It just makes it more complicated. And then always remembering that trauma and loss bring up trauma and loss. So for those of you that are kind of responsible for bigger pieces of pastoral care and ongoing care in your congregations, recognize that if something happens, it is likely that it'll kick up old stuff for folks. And so if you're aware of old stuff that has gone on for people, just keep an eye out for that, because it may or may not, but it's likely. Trauma and loss typically bring up trauma and loss. Now, the good news is that most people bounce back. Most organizations bounce back. Often it takes some time. It usually takes companioning in a lot of different ways and in looking at, but we're built to heal and we do bounce back. And that's the good news. It's not always comfortable or easy. In fact, most of the times it's neither of those things, but it is possible. And that hope and that understanding is always important. So I want to talk about
Julie, just before you go on, one of the questions that got asked is, how long does it ordinarily take for a congregation to develop policies and put them in place? And so if you're just starting from the beginning to having a plan, what would you say the time frame would be?
Well, it depends on how healthy, honestly, and how well your congregation and your leadership is used to implementing new things. It could be, unfortunately, often things get moving faster when something has happened, either maybe not to the congregation, but maybe it's happened around that has got people going, oh, you know what, we need to take care of this and we need to take care of it now. Those instances can sometimes, get a process moving a lot quicker. I would say that you may be looking at a year-long process for some of these things. It wouldn't surprise me. With the other tasks that congregations and leadership has to do, it could take a year from start till you really get a finished product. You may be able to implement pieces of it. To do that, you need to have a few members that are really willing to take this on as their main task and do that. We'll talk a little bit more at the end, but some of the resources that we're going to see on the next page. One is the UU Trauma Response Ministry, in that we actually have consulting available, and we have programs to really take congregations through this process to help expedite some of that. So it could take, if you've got a couple people who are really dedicated, maybe you can get it done in 3, 4, 6 months. But I would also say that you need to be careful of how quickly you move in terms of making sure you have buy-in from the congregation around this as well, so that when you put it together, it's theirs too, and not just 2 people who thought it was important. So I hope that gives.
Thank you. Yes.
If you go past,
and that's been my experience. That's been my experience too in helping congregations do this work. Is that it really takes it. You might be able to develop the plan quickly, but to do the communication and get the buy-in and get all of that really does take some time.
Yeah. So resources, things to think about, knowing, and again, since y'all have copies of the slides, you don't have to take notes on it, it's right here, but here's some to think about that are pretty general across, certainly our congregations around the country and even up into Canada. Your insurance company is a resource for you. Use them. Like I said, Church Mutual, they're a great resource. And so take a look at what they've got.
And many of their resources are available to you even if you are not insured with them, but they do insure 70% of our UU congregations. So,
and regardless of who your insurance company is, start talking with your whoever it is that is your contact person at your insurance company, right? Having connections with them, maybe ask them to come out and do a walk. We always encourage, when trauma response comes in to do consultations, we always encourage congregations to meet with their insurance person, have them come and do a walkthrough of your buildings and your grounds, and see if they see things that you don't see. We also encourage that with your local police departments and your local fire departments. They're going to see things. We do walkthroughs, but we're looking for in a particular lens, and they're all going to look in through different lenses. They're going to see things that you may not be seeing. A way to also think about this as far as stewardship goes, if you do walkthroughs and find that there are places that you've got building deficiencies or issues that may come up, getting that taken care of early could save you money. You never know. There may be things your insurance company representative says, if you take care of this, this, and this, we could actually lower your premium. You never know. So it's worth, there may be other considerations like that could happen. So they're a resource for you. They're not just there to take your check every 6 months. Use them. Also, an attorney. If your congregation doesn't have an attorney, they probably should. Everybody needs somebody that's probably not a member of the congregation. But knowing that if an event happens, an attorney is probably going to be someplace and a resource that you will need. Also look at the UUA, national as well as regional resources. Lisa's a regional representative. So, and I know we have people on this call from a lot of different regions. Who are your regional life consultants? Who are your connections within the region? And then at the UUA, who might you call depending on what the needs are with the incident? Also look at the UU Trauma Response Ministry. We are a resource in a lot of different ways. We show up, which there's in a few slides we'll talk a little more, but we show up after incidents, but as probably most of you didn't know, we show up before as well. So we're a resource. Also look at municipal resources. If an event happens, is there something going to happen in the local, small business community that might be something that would be a resource for your congregation that may need it? Or if there's something, let's say like a flood, and your building is affected, what's the Red Cross doing? What's the Salvation Army doing? What's the, how's the Department of Buildings coming around to make sure that buildings are safe again? So figure out what your municipal resources are. Also looking at local interfaith clergy groups are a great resource. I've been a responder with the UU Trauma Response Ministry team since 2007, and in the last 8 years, particularly in not necessarily large scale, as in the biggest things that people find out nationwide, but just events that affect local communities where people know. I have seen over and over again clergy from other faith traditions and then bringing their congregants over to say, what can we do? So if you've got connections in interfaith groups, they're a great resource. Everything from, you've had a flood in your building and you can't use it for the next few weeks until it gets approved to have residency again. Use our building for this period of time. I mean, just you name it, to people bringing food, to coming around and cleaning bathrooms. It's been remarkable. Look at in terms of what are the mental health and pastoral counseling resources in your area to be able to do referrals. Most of our clergy are not trained in long-term counseling around trauma. That's just not, if you're a congregation-based clergy, that's not where our specialties are typically. So where are the referrals going to go for folks within our congregations and maybe folks outside as well? And here's the thing too, in a smaller events, often the faith community may be the resource. So in smaller events, it may be that folks are coming to your house of worship looking for resources and support. So how are you connected to the bigger pieces of what's around? What can you offer? So these are things to think about. So briefly here, the Trauma Response Ministry, you can read it here. We're UU clergy, lay members, specialists. We're all trained in crisis intervention and trauma response, and we do work and are trained in congregational preparedness. Some of the things that we do is we do education, kind of pre-incident education for individuals as well as congregations around crisis intervention, around congregational preparedness, things like this. We also have, we provide resources to assist congregations post-incident. That is, in the next point there, direct care we provide to congregations and individuals. We do both on-site and off-site care. So you can see we've got an emergency contact line there, that 866-760-3332. That is a hotline that has staffed 24/7, and you can also reach us through the website. There's a contact form on the website, and that's emailed to one of our board members, and we respond to that as well. We get calls from everything from giant events that are big spotlight events, things like the shooting at the Tennessee Valley UU Church in Knoxville, to calls that we've received recently over things. I'm just thinking of the last few that have happened in the last probably 6 weeks, of questions about how to deal with suicide of a teen, not in the congregation, not in the youth group, but a teen in a small community that all of the youth group knew. And so I don't know how to talk through this. So we had resources that we emailed, and then we also talked with the DRE and the minister talked through some strategies around that. So we respond on site and we do off site work as well in a variety of different ways. And I'll say with our hotline, whether you email or you call the hotline, one of the things that comes up is people aren't sure. I don't know if this is big enough. Should we call? I don't know if I should call. Just call. We're happy to, if the resource isn't us, we're happy and do refer people out to like the congregational life. Well, really what this sounds like is more of a systems issue, and you need to call the congregational life staff in your region. Or, we can do this piece, but let's take a look at this. So even if you're not sure, call and we'll find a place for you.
And Julie, am I correct in my understanding that for responding to emergencies and actual crises, there is no fee to the congregations, although donations are always appreciated, but that you may charge fees for the pre-incident education and the safety checks and things like that, merely to, mostly to make sure that there's funding there for when the bad times happen?
Correct. Yeah, there's
right?
no fee for the responses, but for the education, for the consulting, we do charge nominal fees along the UUMA guidelines. We follow those for fees to be able to keep the doors open. We're all volunteers, so we have to be able to get people on planes and get hotel rooms for them when we deploy them.
So one of the things that you could do is you could ask people to, you know, if you want to do this, you get some nearby UU congregations to go in with you, so that they could come and do a class for several congregations, or you can, you know, share the travel expenses and that sort of thing. But the great news is that if something really happens to your congregation, there's no fee charged at all. Both the UUA helps support it from their national funds, which come from your congregational donations, and also other congregations, many of whom have had disasters, but not all of whom, do an annual collection for the trauma response to help keep it going, because they value the service.
Thank you.
So that's your sort of paid political announcement, you know, or the notice from your sponsor.
Thank you. So in terms of closing tasks and things to think about is, what are write down the next steps that you're considering. Write this stuff down. And what can you do this week? You know, it may be that it'll take a year to get everything fully in place, but that year won't start until you start. So the clock ticking on how long it'll take, that clock starts when you start making baby steps along these lines. And really remember, this is a culture change. Culturally, you know, folks in the United States of America, let me tell you, we do not do preparedness very well. We would prefer, and it's crazy because it doesn't make sense economically, it doesn't make sense for any reason, but we would rather spend, there's studies that show something like if you spend $2 in preparedness, you can save like $8 because it's really $10 for recovery, or you could spend $2 in preparedness. And we'd rather spend that extra $8 and not have to think about any preparedness. We just don't have a culture of preparedness, and our congregations don't either. So really think about this as a culture change. Another reason to think that this may take a little slower to do, and not to just bring in and say, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it, and just trust me, follow me. We're looking at changing culture. So how are you going to create a culture of preparedness within your congregation? There's lots of ideas about why and how that could happen. Again, starting with making this not scary, making this about stewardship is just a golden kind of thought process around how to do this so that you've got a chance at starting.
And that reminds me, Julie, of one other resource that I just want to mention, which is the U.S. government has ready.gov, G-O-V, which has tons of resources available, planning for individuals, for congregations, for workplaces, et cetera, where they can help walk you through the issues in their planning guides. So I wanted to make sure that we mentioned that.
Thank you. And actually, in addition, so you can also Google Department of Homeland Security actually has a document. And if you remind me, Lisa, we can email this to everybody who signed up for the call. Because I have the PDF and it might be easier than going to look for it. There is actually a planning guide for houses of worship to do emergency preparedness plans. And it's a pretty decent document. I would, however, caution, they spend a lot of time talking about active shooter situations. And there's nothing wrong with that, but probably a good third of the manual is about how to deal with active shooter situations, which is not statistically the largest thing that folks are dealing with. But like I said, people write plans in response to the last thing that happened. And this guide came out not in about 2008. So, and actually Tennessee Valley is mentioned in the document itself. So it's heavier on that. So I would just say, one of the reasons I don't just send it out without a little bit of talking about it is if you do choose to use this as a tool to help you with your planning, just be aware of talking about that as part of the plan. This is not to scare people to think that we're here worried about active shooter 24/7. So just be aware of, you may need to temper the conversation about it, but it's a great document to help you do some of the planning.
I think you might have another slide. Yes, there we go. And so Julie's thanking you all with this slide for being interested in this. But on behalf of the Mid-America region, our congregations here, and also the people from other regions and parts of the country, really want to thank you, Julie, for sharing your expertise on this. It's a really valuable thing to do. And Alexis, who had all those great questions, wanted to make sure that you know that your answers were very helpful and extra suggestions were fantastic. To let people know, if you have other questions as you go forward, you can always feel free to email me as one of your regional staff people, lpresley, L-P-R-E-S-L-E-Y @UUA.org. And if I can't answer the questions, I can get in touch with Julie then to make sure. You can also go to the Trauma Response Ministry if you're interested in having them come in and do some work with you. I probably should have disclosed this at the beginning, but I was one of the founders of the Trauma Ministry and would maybe still be on the board if my job with the UUA didn't say, no, you can't do that. But I really value the work that is done and appreciate all that the Trauma Response Ministry does. And one of the things you might want to think about as you're preparing your own plan is whether you do want to make a collection to help the Trauma Response Ministry continue, and so that they can respond to others and they would be there if you needed anything. But with that, we really are at time. So again, I really want to thank you, Julie. I don't know if you have any quick, last words you wanted to say, or whether you're good to go.
This really is a thank you for this is a group that clearly, if you're on this call, this is something that's important to you. So keep it out there, keep paying attention to it. You can contact us through email on the website. There's a contact page, and you can send an email through there. I'm getting those right now, so I'll be able to respond to you through that. And know that you're not alone in working on this and finding it's important. You're part of a bigger group that really is viewing this as key right now. So thank you for taking it seriously, because it is serious.
Great. And within a week or so, we should have this, either this version of the webinar or next week's up on recording, so that you can make sure that you can share this video with other people in your congregation as well. So with that, I want to thank you all for attending, and I will be sending out an evaluation to you in the next few days just to get your feedback on tonight's webinar. But thank you very much for the care and concern that we have. Oh, somebody's asking a question. Can we get a list of the participants? We'll have to check whether or not people are willing to have their information shared. So I will, when I send out the evaluation, I'll probably ask you to indicate whether it's okay if your name is shared with others. So thank you all very much, and good night, everyone.